And on the first page of the Meditations, Descartes makes reference to what he refers to as the false opinions of my youth. And here's a suggestion for what the kind of thing you might have in mind there. Suppose you had been born into a society that took the universe to have as its center the Earth. For example, the Ptolemaic system of astronomy was a case of that kind. In the Middle Ages, for example, it was taken as self-evident that the Earth is the center of the universe. Whereas along comes Copernicus, who provides very strong evidence that in fact that isn't true, that in fact the Earth revolves around the sun. If you had started out life as following the intuitively, sensorily, seemingly obvious evidence that the Earth is the center of everything, and then had to give that up in light of the evidence from an astronomer like Copernicus, you might get a case, so to speak, of the willies. You might begin to wonder, well, if that thing that I took to be so obvious as to be beyond question turns out, in retrospect, to have been untrue, then you might wonder, of the other things that I take to be true, take to be obvious, take to be beyond question, how many of those things will end up being exploded sometime in the coming years as well? Descartes says, well, maybe there's a way of, as we're trying to forestall that or trying to prevent that happening again, if I could somehow raise everything to the ground, everything that's possible, that could possibly be doubted, raise everything to the ground in my belief system and begin again from the original foundations. If I have a chance of establishing anything firm and lasting in the area of knowledge, for example in the sciences, then perhaps I should find a way to build everything from the ground up, making sure that everything I do believe is something that I can be sure to be true, to be justified, to be something that can genuinely be said to know. And then he suggests, at last, after all this consideration and many years of putting this off, I'm going to apply myself earnestly and unreservedly to this general demolition of my opinions. Now, on the first reading of that, you might feel that that's a little bit masochistic. He's going to be demolishing his opinions. That must be very painful. But Descartes engaged in an enterprise that makes that intelligible. What he's saying is, I want to take a look at my whole belief system in such a way as to ask, of all those beliefs, are there anything inside of it that I can hold on to as something I can say, I definitely know this to be true, and there's no doubt that could be raised that could get me to have second thoughts about that particular set of beliefs? Is there any way of doing that? That's what he's going to be trying to engage in these meditations. By way of trying to raise things to the ground, he points out that, well, there are various ways in which our senses can and often do deceive us. So, for example, there are illusions, optical illusions, in which it looks like a circle is moving when in fact it's not. I'm sure that you've seen in psychology textbooks on perception and so forth, all kinds of illusions that make things look different from the way they are. Likewise, you might, perhaps you're sleep deprived, you've been staying up way too late, you might see a hallucination. Or perhaps you're ill, you've had a very, very bad fever, and you hallucinate that, for example, the ceiling of your bedroom is moving around in waves. These things are not terribly uncommon. Those are cases in which the senses deceive us. Of course, Descartes will say there are even dreams, in which you have a very, very vivid experience inside of your dream. At the time, it seems you believe that what's going on is true. That's why, for example, last night your roommate was screaming in her sleep, not because anybody was actually stabbing her, but because she was having a very vivid dream of someone doing so, perhaps. At the time, presumably, she believed that this was happening. That's why she screamed out. So that is to say, Descartes will point out that we do have these experiences that do deceive us. Illusions, hallucinations, and dreams are all cases of this kind. And Descartes says, well, but surely when I'm sitting here right now, we're supposing with him that he's sitting in a dressing gown, famously. I'm not sure if this is legend or how much truth there is, but we're invited to imagine he's sitting in a dressing gown in a little cottage somewhere with a fire. Perhaps he's got some parchment that he's writing on with a quill-tip pen and so forth. And he says, well, I do know that sometimes I have very vivid dreams, but surely right now I know that I'm sitting here in my dressing gown next to the fire with my pen in hand, etc. To which he replies to himself, well, this would be well and good were I not a man who's accustomed to sleeping at night, and in particular, even then our dreams sometimes are so vivid that we have dreams such as that I'm sitting in my dressing gown next to a fire writing some philosophy. Descartes responds to that by saying, well, perhaps then I can't be sure that I'm not dreaming right now, but it's, at least this I can be sure. Even here, our dreams need some raw materials to draw on. For example, extension, that is size, shape, quantity, size, number, location of things, these concepts that we have, Descartes says, surely those dreams are based in something external to us, correct? Now, Descartes is, in a small way, showing his hand right there when he says extension, shape, quantity, size, number, and location, because he's suggesting at that point that those might be raw materials that do objectively correspond to something outside of ourselves, some fact of the matter about reality, but he's just trying to presage something that will come later. He's not pushing that too hard. But he wants to suggest that perhaps geometry and arithmetic are more certain than astronomy and medicine, because astronomy and medicine require sensory information, looking through telescopes, using stethoscopes and so forth, whereas geometry and arithmetic seem like they're things that we can do in some sense inside of our heads. And so they seem less subject to being areas of illusion in the way that our senses sometimes can deceive us.